Hello and welcome to the Physiology of Endurance Running podcast. I'm Owain. I'm joined by Dan. How's it going, Dan?
Yeah, not bad, thanks. Yeah, doing all right. Doing all right. I've got to start with an announcement, I think, but I
Yeah.
hate to disappoint the fans, but I'm not doing my 15 3K double tomorrow on time recording at the Aberdare BMC. I've had a few messages looking forward to my 1500 meters. I'm gonna call it a debut because it's been like 7 years since I ran one, but just missed a bit of training, got a bit ill, and I've done one session since, and it was all right, but still don't feel like quite back to normal. And I definitely don't need to go hammer myself in a 3K and a 15 when it's
Yeah.
actually
On a
supposed to just,
Tuesday night in
yeah,
Aberdare.
yeah, when it's just supposed to be a training session for a race later in the year. I'm going to get more benefit out of doing some more threshold, I think. But I am considering some sort of time trial-esque or finishing a session or just something like really hard, like
Yeah.
some threshold and then like, right, a mile flat out, no pacing, no watch, just lap it at the start, don't look at the splits and just run and see what I end up with.
I was going to say no pacing, but like if you let me know, I'll come, we'll go on Instagram live or something.
Yeah, you'll pace me around. Yeah.
Well, I'll ride a bike with a camera.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's do it. But
It'll
anyway,
be
yeah.
fun. Butte Park.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So next race, Home Nations 5K. Oh, I guess an announcement. I think it's been announced. It will be by the time the podcast goes out. I'm in my Welsh team for the Home Nations 5K, so that's pretty cool.
Do you get the new kit as well?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I would have for Valencia anyway, but yeah, I get it early. Get it early. That's nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
I like the vest. The new vest is pretty cool from what I've seen.
It's good. I know even at the 100K, Rachel was saying like when we were coming into the like where the aid stayed, the tents and whatever was, like there was Wales and England and Northern Ireland all had like predominantly white kit. So it's sort of hard. Ireland, you could tell, Northern Ireland, sorry, you could tell because they had like a little green bit at the bottom, but like it was hard to differentiate. Whereas now the Wales kit is all red.
Yeah,
which is,
that's better, isn't it?
yeah, quite
that's
cool.
better. It did look like England.
A bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't want to say it.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, but other than that, only a minor disruption. But I was annoyed because I had like 4 weeks of like 184 to 187K. And then I had a week of 120 and then 157. So it was like the back end of 1 week, start of the next, you know.
Yeah.
So that's a kicker even more, isn't it? It gets 2 weeks of down volume, even though the back end of last week was pretty normal.
I think you sent me a voice note saying you were going for like a 200K week and then like the next day you were ill, which I think is probably like the third time that's happened now. I think normally when you tell me you're going for a 200K week.
No, I've learned. I don't do 200Ks anymore. 185, sweet spot for me at the minute. Maybe I'll adapt to it, and after I've done a bit of chunk of time at 185, I can make the next jump. But that does seem to be a good spot for me at the minute.
Yeah.
But that all changes with how much intensity you're doing and whatever, doesn't it?
Even the weather and stuff, doesn't it, as well?
Yeah.
And when you can get out to train.
How much buggy running I've been doing. I've done a lot of buggy running recently. Jemima was away this weekend and I was adding it up. So I buggy ran Saturday, we did park run. Sunday, we did 2 hours with you and a good group around Cardiff Bay. And then did 10K with Nye this evening. So he did 47K in 3 days, which I think is pretty good going.
Yeah, that's a long time in a buggy.
Yeah, and he's not moaned like once. So yeah, I've been very impressed.
You put the dinosaur tunes on for the last half hour of the long run.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, I think he'd had enough by then, but he wasn't telling me I want to get out. So
yeah. I guess that's your training update. I didn't even have to ask.
Yeah, there you go. How about you? How are things with you?
Good. Yeah. Yeah, so as of the day of recording, I did a VO2 max test. And like you, my VO2 max has gone down, even though my hemoglobin mass has gone up. So riddle that. That's not what it's not what...
and your blood volume's up, right?
Yeah, I had like a litre more plasma volume compared to...
mine was something like that. I can't remember what it was. It was
like in January, I think it was.
It seems crazy, didn't it? But a kilo
Yeah,
heavier.
and
Like,
even
a kilo heavier. You should be.
but then I was lighter as well, like or like you know 0.2 of a kilo lighter
Well,
for
same,
the
isn't it? That's
for
the
both
same.
bits. So
I was I was
yeah,
I was 200 grams heavier, so that's not. And I think I was about a liter more blood volume. So
yeah, yeah. So I guess it's interesting, yeah, that like yeah you. I mean, and that's you know it's that's the point of Joe's study, isn't it? That like well, first of all, these things don't necessarily correlate, and um, VO2 max is a good well is a good measure. You know, there's significantly worse measures that get used, but it comprises so many different things that you
yeah,
know
well, it's like
it's not.
it's like running economy, isn't it? I think in that running economy is easy, is reasonably easy to measure when you got the kit, but then the determinants of it are really hard to explain. VO2 max is more quantifiable, isn't it? But it's still blood volume, cardiac output, I uptake of oxygen from the blood. I just doing a VO2
Yeah,
max test doesn't tell you which of those components has changed.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I guess that's the reason why it's you know like you're seeing it more and more be like touted as this like such a good determinant of health. But part of that's because it encompasses a
Yeah.
big chunk of sort of your body's like processes, right?
Well,
Like
I've heard that.
it's not just
I've
that
heard
you
people suggest. We're getting really off topic now, but I've heard people
know.
suggest that VO2 max is a great indicator of longevity and health, and purely because you can't have a big VO2 max if you're overweight and obese, because if you're scaled to body weight, then
Yeah,
it's just impossible. You can't have an absolute VO2 max of 10 liters per minute to compensate for being overweight. So that's what another
yeah,
reason why it's a good scoring. But yeah, I'm sure I'm 100% certain that there are going to be physiological reasons why having a VO2 max is going to be protective. But the weight, we know that being morbidly obese reduces your life expectancy like massively. So VO2 max is taking that into account as well. You're basically taking everything into account. Then yeah, it's going to predict mortality to a certain extent.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just an all-encompassing measure, isn't it?
Yeah.
Versus I don't know, like I sort of contrasted against like grip strength, which
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah. That's a great predictor of.
fairly localized
Yeah,
and yeah.
yeah.
But no, yeah, yeah. So yeah, did that? No, been going all right. I think we'll get us back on topic. We'll save this for the Q&A that's coming up at some point in the next 2 months. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, where we can just go off topic. But no, we had just done a really good interview with Tim Podlogar. Tim is pretty well known in the carbohydrate research world. So he's a lecturer at the University of Exeter. He was previously at the University of Birmingham, and then the University of Primorska in Slovenia, where he's from as well. But he's also worked for Redbull BORA hansgrohe and Tudor Pro Cycling, which are both world tour cycling teams. So he's worked, you know, at the peak of applied sports science um, as their nutrition consultant or performance nutritionist, which I think is pretty cool. Like that's probably one of the pinnacles
That is one of the
of
highest jobs, isn't it, in
sports
sports
science, isn't it?
science? And I think we've talked about this before, but so much of our learnings comes from the cycling world, because there's more funding, there's there's more input into applied work, regardless of research. You know, Tim is both, but they are trialing things and have more capacity to trial things. And also, I think the unique aspects of cycling is that it's a team, isn't it? And so you've got a more systematic approach to it, whereas running is it's amazing that even at the elite level, it's so individual a lot of the time. You've just got a coach and an athlete working together, especially in the marathon and stuff. It's probably less
Mm.
common in the middle distance. There tends to be bigger groups, don't there? But so there's a lot of marathon runners out there who are just doing their own thing with sometimes quite a bit of input from a governing body or sometimes none. They just crack on.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess as well with cycling, um, it maybe well, it lends itself maybe a bit more to research, doesn't it? And Tim sort of mentions that he doesn't do loads of research with runners just because even just the act of running introduces another variable to carbohydrate intake, especially during exercise. And then when he starts to talk about some of the durations of testing that he's doing, like again, cycling lends itself so much more to that testing as well. So it may be where you're trying to isolate variable, and with again, as Tim sort of talks about, with some of the ways you measure like carbohydrate uptake, you need everything else to be like very tightly controlled, and it's just so much more controlled with cycling, isn't it?
Yeah, and you can
Like
just quantify the work done much better than running. Like you can measure power, and that's a great marker of total work done. Whereas running is really hard to quantify the external work, because you can look at speed, but how much of that energy is going into moving up and down, and like it's cycling is just easier to work with as a scientist than running, unfortunately.
Yeah. But I guess at the same time, you can learn a lot from the research, and Tim is very good. He's very good in the applied setting. That's why he's working at the Tour de France. But he's done a lot of research, and hopefully it's an enjoyable one. We really enjoyed it. We went quite deep into some of his research, which we hope everyone appreciates. We'll make sure we chuck some links to the papers that we discussed, because they are really interesting papers, and Tim talks through the papers, but he also talks sort of about some of his thoughts that maybe didn't make it into the write-up, or some of his thinking, and he sort of mentions as where you have quite small participant numbers, things maybe aren't as clear, so it more offers you that sort of chance to then think like, okay, what's going on here? And I really enjoyed the interview. Hopefully there's a lot of takeaways. Maybe they're not necessarily direct answers, but I think that's actually probably really where we are with nutrition, right? I would be skeptical if you listen to someone and they say do X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
Maybe with carb loading before, that's a bit more clear, but carbohydrate intake during, there's still so much in the air that actually just thinking about it is probably a better place to be than, oh, this person told me to do this.
That's not how we should be starting this podcast. We should be saying, this, you're going to know by the end of this episode, like, these are the 5 things you need to do to become better at nutrition and fueling.
We're better than that.
Yeah, we're rising above that. Yeah. No, but Tim does make him. Yeah, he speaks a lot about the individual variability and tailoring the nutrition of the athletes he's working with in the same tour team. They're doing the same stage, but their nutrition plan is not going to look the same when they're competing in the Grand Tours.
Yeah. Good interview. As always, we're sponsored by SOAR. I think you've tried out the new kit now as well, right?
I unashamedly tried out. I had a full SOAR test run with the new trail gear, half tights and t-shirt. Yeah, very nice. Very nice. I got to say, I didn't stress test for shorts yet, but it's literally like a band all the way around. Like the previous like marathon split shorts is just at the back, isn't it? Whereas these ones, you could have like 20 gels in there, I reckon, stashed around the front, the back, wherever you wanted. It was I'm
really curious to see if I can get like the full mandatory kit for a fell race in them. I think you could.
Yeah.
Because like it's like you can get it in a bum bag for a fell race if you've got like really nice lightweight like waterproof trousers.
I reckon you could. You need waterproof trousers in your kit.
Yeah, if you're going up on a mountain.
Oh, come on!
Remember, we're in Wales. Like
I know, but like that's a bit OTT, isn't it?
No,
that's what puts me off the fell stuff and the trail stuff. It's like when it's different when it's a 6-hour epic, but when it's like an hour up and down.
Yeah, you carry a jacket and trousers, like no picnics or anything, like in some of the ultras. Like just your mandatory kit, because you're almost certainly going to fall over, so you might actually hurt yourself.
All right, yeah.
And then you've got your.
Can you take a kid's coat and a kid's like waterproof trousers? Because
they don't check, but I know one of the fell race directors listens to this, so that might be. You might have just rumbled half the field. I've heard of people doing that ultras, so
yeah. But regardless, it is really nice stuff. And I do want to test it out properly with having a pack on, and because this t-shirt, the whole idea is it's reinforced in the areas where you are gonna rub, and because I've tried running with a pack with a vest on before, and it doesn't work very well, does it? In terms of you've got your pack rubs you everywhere, and even with a normal t-shirt on, it just wears it out.
Yeah, it's the little details, isn't it? Like with the t-shirt, even like around the neck, the collar's a little bit higher so that you don't get your pack. Because I've had that. I've had like sort of chafing on like my neck where the pack has gone above my top, and it's just on my bare neck. So yeah, like even the little collar, like it's not like a shirt collar, but there's just a little collar
A little
on
lip,
the shirt that will stop that happening as well. Which is just those the really nice little elements of sore kit that that a bunch of runners wore it, and then we're like, oh, that would be really cool to add.
Yeah.
This happens to me. Let's address it.
I do really like the color as well of the top. It's classic sore colors, like the white with the rainbow like emerging from the bottom. That was cool.
Yeah,
go check them
really
out.
Cool, yeah.
Really good stuff. And thank you again, Saw, for continuing to support our podcast.
Yeah, thanks as always, and enjoy the interview with Tim. So we're really excited to be joined today by Dr. Tim Podlogar. Tim is a lecturer at the University of Exeter. He's previously been at the University of Birmingham and the University of Primorska. And he's also worked for Redbull BORA hansgrohe previously, and now works with Tudor Pro Cycling, both World Tour cycling teams, so at the absolute pinnacle of professional cycling. We're really excited to talk to Tim about carbohydrate. How's it going, Tim?
Hey, doing great. I just had my carbs, so I'm happy to talk about carbs.
Perfect. I guess to sort of go straight into it, you've done a lot of work, especially about carbohydrate intake during exercise, which is I guess you might be biased, but I think it's probably one of the hot topics at the moment, right? In endurance sports.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Yeah, and I guess we sort of wanted to go through a couple of your papers that sort of we've come back to ourselves in terms of like our own running. Like we're both runners, unfortunately, so I guess the first one that really stood out to me, and I think crosses into the applied side as well, maybe is interesting to some of our listeners, was the work you did about body size and carbohydrate intake. Related to body size, and I wonder maybe it's better if are you able to give a sort of summary of what you maybe found with that paper, because I think you'll do a better job than me.
So yeah, I'm a co-author on that paper, but one of the things that we kind of have been trying to figure out is for a long time that like you're working with professional athletes, and obviously you have riders or athletes that have like 55 kilos or even below 50 kilos, and then you have riders that are like 80 kilos or 80 kilos plus. And when you put them on the roads, obviously the energy demands are completely different. Somebody would need to be pushing way higher watts, so the energy expenditure would be higher than the smaller rider. And at the end of the day, you come home and you have like a massive difference in the energy expenditure and then the energy intake as well. So if you look at the guidelines for sports nutrition, they're very like exact, and like for during exercise we have, let's say, up to 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour, whereas when we talk about post exercise we always talk about grams per kilo. So that's kind of like a bit of an interesting observation, like the recommendations for during exercise are based solely on just a number, and it seems that it's the same for everyone. So when you start to explore and like do tests, where you start to test people that are ingesting carbohydrates during exercise, and you figure out how much they are oxidizing, you figure out that actually, like on average, they can oxidize like 60 grams of glucose per hour, which is like textbook. But when you look at the proportion, or like the standard deviation, or from the center, you see like some people are oxidizing more and some people are oxidizing less. And then this paper that was really nicely designed by Javi Gonzalez in Bath actually attempted to look at what determines exogenous carbohydrate oxidation rates. Is it body size or is it power output, so the energy demand during exercise, and if there is some relationship. And in the end, we found out that there is a relationship with body size, so that bigger athletes are more likely to be able to oxidize more carbohydrates during exercise, and this seems to be not dependent on the power output as much as the body size. So that was basically the conclusion of the paper. But if you really look into the data, you still see a lot of variation. So if you look at the body size or body weight on the same kind of look at the on x-axis where it's I think body size, and you basically can pick two athletes that are very similar in body size, you will still see a massive variation in exogenous carbohydrate oxidation rates. So we can say it's more likely bigger athlete will oxidize more, but it's not necessarily true.
So if you think, sorry, do you mind if I jump in there, Owain?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So if you've shown that weight does influence, or body mass does influence our ability to oxidize carbohydrate, exogenous carbohydrate sources, how much of that variance is explained by body weight, and what other factors do you think might influence one's ability to oxidize exogenous carbohydrate stores?
I don't know the number from the top of my head, but I think it was a significant proportion of that was explained. The sample size was relatively small. We need to we'd be really looking at much larger data set to basically show things. This was rather small study. And if I look at some other studies, some other data from my lab, I perhaps would not see this relationship. So I think it's really variable, and I think there is still a lot to basically think about. So one of the things that could definitely influence is, so it's not just body mass, I think it's more like body size that has a bigger impact. And then the next one would be training status. So let's say that a person is training more than a person that is training less. So the training status will basically determine the daily energy requirements of the person and basically the exposure of this person to carbohydrates on a daily life, because a person that trains more will be eating on a daily basis more carbohydrates. So perhaps that's something that also is a factor, which we haven't explored because we really need to pull and make a larger data set to look into that. But that would be my guess. So that if the more you're exposed to carbohydrates, the more likely it is that you will have higher oxidation rates of ingested carbohydrates. And people with low carbohydrate diet perhaps will have lower. I don't know. I haven't tested any, but that's just my speculation, because based on the rodent models, so from rats or mice, there is some evidence to suggest that mice or rats that would be on a low carbohydrate diet would be able to absorb less carbohydrates than the same rodents fed on a high carbohydrate diet.
Is there maybe some element of I guess if we talk about sort of just general training and a sort of a signal and response, do you think that's maybe happening with sort of transporters in your gut for transporting carbohydrates? I guess that's getting it into the bloodstream, and then there's sort of downstream as well. But just thinking off the top of my head right now, do you think that maybe is at play, that the more you do it, the more it then, we say, trains your gut and trains your body? Do you think that might actually be happening?
I kind of have a feeling that it's probably more total exposure of the gut to the carbohydrates rather than just during exercise, because the gut doesn't really know is it exercise or not. I think the biggest difference between kind of training the gut, what it does is basically allows you to have the gut full of carbohydrates and actually absorb them at the capacity. So for running, I think this is really important because because of this all up and down movement that doesn't occur in cycling. So I think from that perspective, it's really important, but I'm not too convinced that would actually increase the absorption rate.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So everyone's always talked about training the gut and how important that is, but I would I never really thought about it in terms of exposing the gut to high carbohydrate diets outside of training, but it does make perfect sense. Like you said, the GI tract isn't going to know if it's excising or not necessarily.
Yeah, I think like obviously we don't really know. Like this is just speculation because we don't really actually have any studies looking at this very properly. And what I've seen in the lab, like I just don't really see any relationship. But it's probably because I always have a similar type of people coming to the lab to do my studies, rather than like people on a low carbohydrate diet. Probably they would not be interested in a carbohydrate research anyway. So
yeah, I mean, anecdotally, I know that if I've done lots of carbohydrate training, taking on a lot of carbohydrates during training and during high intensity training, my tolerance for that goes up. But do you think there is a correlation between tolerating it and actually using that carbohydrate that you're intaking? Do you think there's or is it a complete mismatch?
I've seen both ways. So, for instance, like I'm currently running a study in which I look at trying to personalize both glucose and fructose, and basically I get people to come in, and then we personalize the glucose ingestion rate, and then I see like relatively big riders, highly trained on a high carbohydrate diet day in, day out, and their absorption rate would be relatively low. And then the other day I had a runner that happens to cycle sometimes, and his absorption or like oxidation of ingested carbohydrates was actually really surprisingly high. But the thing was that he was not really able to tolerate that. So when he was like judging the effort or like judging the rating the gut comfort during exercise, it was like highly not pleasant for him, even though like he was still absorbing most of the carbohydrates. So you would have people that would be tolerating the carbohydrates just well, but not absorbing them. And then you would have people that would be just like, yeah, we can't take them anymore. And that's probably down to training, because this runner was never eating carbohydrates during training, but he was able to absorb quite a bit.
Yeah, it's certainly less common, I think, isn't it, in running? And it's becoming more common to fuel your training, but I think it's still in the emerging, still like a trending upwards, I'd say. Going back to your case study there, I've had the opposite. Using me as an anecdote again, in the Valencia Marathon last year, I'd done loads of carbohydrate training and took on 110 grams an hour during the race, tolerated it fine, and then threw up at the end. So I obviously wasn't absorbing it all because I was on the floor, hands on knees for a good couple of minutes there. But felt like during the whole race had no symptoms of GI distress at all. But obviously I hadn't used all of that carbs. It was just sitting in my stomach.
Yeah, that's basically it. Like the absorption and tolerance are two different things. And for absorption to occur, you need a tolerance, but tolerance doesn't necessarily equate to absorption.
I think that might be a good segue onto sort of the next paper I really wanted to talk about, and I've heard quite a lot about this in the last few months. This is the paper looking at intake rates per hour, so 90 versus 120 grams per hour. Obviously, we're hearing more people talk about like really ramping up their carbohydrate intake. I know, was it Camworth in an Ironman did like 150 grams an hour or something on the bike, which is pretty mental. I think he's a pretty big guy, isn't he? Like so maybe he can tolerate a bit more, maybe not. But yeah, are you again okay to sort of talk us through that paper, because I think that's really interesting. Sort of maybe goes against the current trends to a degree.
Yeah, it was during my PhD, and like I was thinking, I had a lot of free time to actually think about carbohydrates, and sorry. And one of the things that I was thinking at the time was like, looking at all these studies, they were like always the same people doing the studies in Birmingham, because it was like Birmingham University, it was Asker Jokendrup doing them, and he had similarly trained population every single time. So the results from all the studies basically show very similar results. And one of the things I started to think about was like, perhaps if you really get into the lab super highly trained people, you would be able to oxidize more, because at some point you just can't expect the body to be oxidizing more carbohydrates if there is simply no demand for these carbohydrates. Kind of thinking perhaps it's not the absorption that is the limiting factor, but it's actually the demand for carbohydrates. That was just like my random thought during my PhD. But then it was only later on when I was back to Slovenia where I was able to basically do such a study. So we got really highly trained people. They were usually not world class, but they were highly trained in terms of like the absolute power output. And I was thinking, okay, this will mean that there will be a high demand for carbohydrates. So a high demand for carbohydrates should mean that they would be oxidizing more, but also sparing glycogen as a result of that. So we got people that were, I think, riding for 3 hours at least 250 watts. So pretty high average power output. And we saw that, yeah, with 120, you increase oxidation rates of exogenous carbohydrates. Well, the second finding was more surprising, which was that we just didn't see any glycogen sparing. So at the end of 3 hours, these people were likely with the same levels of muscle glycogen, muscle and liver glycogen. So what's the benefit of having 120 as compared to 90? We were underpowered, but if you look closely at the data, you can actually see that fat oxidation rates was suppressed in the 120 as compared to 90 grams per hour, indicating that basically you are sparing fat, not carbohydrates.
I guess so I had a read, and like I heard you in another interview sort of mention that, but then my thought was then would that maybe not be beneficial in terms of like just using glycogen is a more efficient more efficient means of producing energy than using fat. So would it still have some benefit, or no? Would actually you still want to sort of, I guess, use endogenous fat stores as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It really depends on what type of exercise you're after. So let's say if you're a runner and you have like one goal of the season, and that's like the marathon, you obviously want to suppress fat oxidation because using carbohydrates is more efficient, and this will likely improve the performance on the day. Fair enough. Similar applies for triathlon. Again, the more carbohydrates we'll use, the less fat, and if it doesn't increase the glycogen use, then all fine. Like again, priorities in carbohydrates can be more efficient. But then you have cycling where you have stage races. And one of the problems with stage races is that after the stage, you're not done because you have another one and another one and another one. And you want to keep energy balance at the end of the day, because otherwise the riders in a 3-week stage race will gain body mass. And if you think what happens after the stage, when you have 90 versus 120, you have the same amount of glycogen, but you used way more of the budget you had for the intake of carbohydrates. So 4-hour stage race, 90 versus 120, 4 times 30 grams, that's 120 grams of carbohydrates, less than you have in the recovery with 120 as compared to 90. That's pretty significant when it comes to the glycogen stores for the next day. And that's basically where the issue is. Where are you going to put a priority? Yeah. And it can actually happen very often, like in stage races, that simply going too high, you just don't have any budget for dinner anymore because you just killed everything on the bike because it was not that hard.
I guess then is there any element of even sort of periodizing that intake with riders? So if you've got your GC guy and it's a flat stage and there's no wind, so it's just probably going to be nothing for them, just a sort of exercise of burning the least amount of calories. like then yeah, okay, go for 90 grams. Whereas if it's like the, you know, queen stage, like maybe you up the intake. Would that be happening at all?
Yeah, definitely. Like you would be like periodizing the intake, both in racing and also in training, because the same would be like, even if you like go back to running, for instance, like if you train every single day with high carbohydrate intake, this will mean that you will have to reduce the amount of carbohydrates after the training, and then the glycogen stores for the next training might not be full, and then you will be underperforming for the next section. So it's all like fueling for the work required, as people say. So like thinking when you actually need the carbohydrates the most and put them there. And you have like flat stages, you might be at 80 grams per hour, and then super hard stages, you might be at 120 or even more, depending on the rider. So you really decide and like see where the priorities are.
And I guess my other question with this paper was that it didn't look like all of the carbohydrate, all of the exogenous carbohydrates were like used. Like there was some that wasn't used, and it was different rates based on the different amounts sort of being intaken. Do you have any sort of speculation on what was happening with that sort of excess, or I guess excess, or just not used carbohydrate?
Yeah, that's another like really good question, and like you will see that there is like this study by Aitor Viribai from similar time as I think a bit before my 90 was 120, in which he showed improved recovery in trail runners with 120 as compared to 90, and based on like my work and that there is no glycogen sparing, and he also didn't see any performance benefits, but definitely this probably meant that there was more carbohydrates available for immediate recovery, and that probably could have influenced the improved recovery the next day. And I think this is what can also happen, so that basically you get access, or the body get access to the carbohydrates quicker than if you just have the carbohydrates at the finish line.
I guess that's as long as you don't throw them up like Dan did in Valencia. You jeopardised your recovery doing that, Dan.
Yeah, I didn't really care about recovery after the day after a marathon, to be honest. Didn't have another one planned for a few months.
Yeah, no, I thought like I just thought it was interesting, like that you're almost like ahead of the trend has been, you know, more and more like more is better, but then you're already sort of like ahead of the trend. I thought that was quite cool. And I guess like I was asking, like, does it have any impact on the applied work you do? So going back to that first paper about body size, like, do you find that sort of bears out with the professional cyclists you use? Like, are you finding like the bigger sprinters are generally able to tolerate more carbs than the sort of small climbers, or not really in those cases as well?
You have like everything. You have small guys that can tolerate a lot, and then you have big guys that can't tolerate a lot. So I think it goes both ways. But one of the things, like when it comes to like periodization and like the training, it's not just like flat out rate. So you go 90 or you go 80 or 120 or 140 grams per hour. You always have to like look at it that you can also periodize within the race. So what I really like to do with my guys is like start a bit lower and then finish a bit higher. That means that like probably there is more carbohydrates available for recovery. And also one of the things that we didn't test in 120 versus 90, but would be really cool to do, is to actually measure performance at the end of the test. Because if you think of what happens at the time of fatigue, or like after 3 hours of riding, assuming that the glycogen levels are exactly the same. So based on the work from the, I think, 90s or 80s, we know that once you deplete your glycogen stores, you start relying on the ingested carbohydrates. And because we know that 120 gives you higher availability of ingested carbohydrates, this might also then result in better performance, which we did not measure, because measuring this in the lab is pointless. But this is also an option to consider. So towards the end of the race, especially a long race, you want to increase the carbohydrate intake and have it as high as you basically can absorb, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I guess then that sort of nicely again leads on to the next paper, which was a really recent one looking at personalized carbohydrate feeding. Is that paper sort of then informing your sort of, I guess, prescription of, yeah, like starting slow and increasing the carbohydrate intake throughout? Um,
No, like personalization is basically getting the maximum amount measured for each
okay.
individual, which unfortunately is not as common as I would like it to be in professional sports, because it's still like kind of, if you want to do it right, it's kind of annoying test. You need 2 hours and a half, you need steady state, you need really exercise intensity close to the first lactate threshold. It can be too hard, you can't stop and go to the toilet or have any breaks. You need to use the isotope tracers, you need to do it in a cooled environment, and it's like kind of complicated if you want to do it right. So it's kind of limited to the lab, and I only tested like 2 professional cyclists so far. And yeah, this is something I think can basically inform the practice and reassure the practitioner that the recommendation they gave actually makes sense. But I think we are quite far away from like actually having this accurately used in professional world.
Do we know anything about the day-to-day variation in our ability to tolerate, absorb, and use exogenous carbohydrates? Do you think that's quite variable, or is it reasonably consistent between athletes, or have we literally got no clue? I imagine, because like you said, it's complicated to test, and imagine people to be repeat tested is going to be even lower than the number of people who have done it once.
I think the number should be the same every day, and like if you really control the diet and if you really control the fatigue levels and you really control everything, then the value will end up being the same. The problem is that we know that heat affects the exogenous carbohydrate oxidation rates. We know that dehydration affects exogenous carbohydrate oxidation rates. We know that energy balance and carbohydrate availability in the morning affects exogenous carbohydrate oxidation rates. And you know, like when you're dealing with athletes or like participants in studies, everything is really hard to control. And even on a massive grand tour, there might be a day when the rider would simply not be able to absorb that much because was fatigued and underfueled the previous day and a super hot day or something like that. And we are talking about 30% reductions, which is kind of quite significant if you think about it. So, and there is also a little bit of measurement error. So you have everything very variable, I think.
Yeah, because I guess a bit of background for me. Until recently, I was testing athletes like in a commercial sector, like assessing obviously VO2 max, thresholds, economy, and then also getting the fat and carbohydrate oxidation rates. And everyone would always be really interested in that stuff. But, and I know this isn't the same as how much you're absorbing and utilizing, but I would just, the amount of variation you would see from if an athlete came in like from over like 2 or 3 visits or stuff I've done with myself, like sometimes my RAR is going to be 0.8 at the start and I'm burning loads of fat. Sometimes it starts in the 0.9s and it's just not, it's a noisy figure, isn't it? It's so variable day to day depending on how much carbohydrate you've been consuming and how fatigued you are on your training levels.
Yeah, I think RER is more variable than actually this measure. So I've seen people that like RER would be super high and the next time it would be super low and then the value would be still the same. But that, measuring carbohydrate and fat oxidation rates on on this VO2 max test, I think is like almost as useful as a random number generator, but yeah.
Yeah, and like Dan said, like it's the first thing people ask about.
I know.
Yeah, just
What are your thoughts? Owain, what are your thoughts, Tim, on looking at like not necessarily the peak fat oxidation rate, but like the power output that occurs at? Is that something that you would be interested in with riders you're testing, or again, do you think that's? I wouldn't comment as much on the variability of that, but Do you think it's important?
I don't know what I would do with that data, like as a coach, to be honest. Like it's a piece of data or a datum that, like, I don't know how it helps the training process. And to me, it was really interesting. Years ago, my first PhD study, in which we did like some kind of sleep low, so low carbohydrate availability, and then delayed carbohydrate feeding during the subsequent exercise. And at the time, I was like super convinced that like, this periodization or low carbohydrate training really is improving the performance. And at the time also, like, everyone was talking about high fat oxidation rates, how good they are. And one of the things that like was kind of interesting to me was like, I measured people on a VO2max test. I did the RAM test to basically just characterize them, and I saw like fat oxidation rates of like 0.2, 0.3 grams per minute, which is kind of normal, I guess, for like people with a VO2max of like 55 or something. And then after the sleep low approach, some people were able to oxidize 1 gram per minute. Like suddenly they became fat burners overnight. So we are really flexible in using carbohydrates and fats. It's just that how nutritionally we come, the nutritional stages determines what we are using at the end of the day. And the time of the day, the glycogen stores, what they have eaten before, I think this is just like, more of an influence than anything else.
Yeah, because if you did a performance trial with various athletes who were burning 1 gram per minute of fat, their performance would be way worse than the athlete who was burning 0.3 grams a minute of fat.
Exactly, yeah. It's like a competition of its own, like who uses more fat, but just not measure performance.
Yeah, and I've definitely seen a trend in that, and people, really interested in what's my peak and where does it occur. And I've always sort of, gas data is just noisy anyway, isn't it? The variability is there. We always use 5-minute stages to get a good average over like 2 minutes, but even then, like, it is noisy and variable and so dependent. But I try and say it's an interesting, but look at the VO2 max thresholds economy. That's going to tell you much more about you as an individual and probably be more helpful than looking at fat burning rates. Yeah,
but it's an interesting number for people, no?
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's interesting to look at. It makes a nice, pretty graph, and that's nice.
I guess next question for me was I guess about this other paper that was really interesting to me was your review of post-exercise nutrition and post-exercise nutrition for recovery. I guess you broke it down, which I really liked. You broke it down into the areas with strong evidence, and then I think you said, was it like medium evidence and then like weak evidence, I think were your categories. I really liked the way that was broken down. And I guess if we could go through a couple of the sort of areas, I mean, like the top one, we're going to talk about carbohydrates. You sort of broke this down into sort of saying it's like crucial on 24-hour cycles, and especially carbohydrate intake sort of within 1 to 4 hours of exercise was really important. I wondered if you could just sort of go into why that's the case and sort of what you would suggest for people, immediately after their run or their cycle, like what they're thinking about.
I mean, usually like for most like people, the biggest limitation of like getting the glycogen levels back up is basically the time availability, because they want to do the next training session the next day and feel good about it. And if you deplete glycogen stores, you need around 20 hours probably to completely replete glycogen stores, at least 20 hours. So the sooner you start, the better it is. And after exercise, muscle just likes to take up glucose irrespective of insulin levels. And because we live in this society when everyone is so obsessed about insulin and high glucose levels, it's just nice to recommend carbohydrates straight after exercise, because we can tell them that people that insulin levels will not be as high. But yeah, just kidding. I think the glycogen stores will be repleted at most efficiently just after exercise. And I think it makes sense from the perspective of recovery, because it's not just glycogen stores. I think there is a really nice study that was published, I think, last year, that showed that like if you delay carbohydrate intake, perhaps you don't suppress reduce the amount of glycogen the next day if you equate an amount of carbohydrates in the period, but your performance will be worse the next day. So I think it really makes sense to just have the carbs straight after.
And I guess one of the other bits of interesting, the strong evidence and interesting area was the co-ingestion of carbohydrate and protein. And it was just a note I made that I think I got this the right way, that this may have a better impact if recovery is taking place over less than 24 hours. And I think especially for our audience, me and Dan will be doubling. So we'll run in the morning, run in the evening. Do you think maybe then actually in that instance, especially after that first run, actually co-ingesting some carbohydrate and protein might be more beneficial, where if you're just running once a day, just sort of getting your daily amount of protein is the bigger aim rather than that immediate dose, I guess.
I think there is a big contentious debate at the moment going on about this, whether it's okay to have one big amount of protein or split it in multiple doses. From applied practitioner's perspective, I would argue that it's nicer to have smaller doses and have them spread throughout the day. And one of the good things about protein is that you can have less carbohydrates to basically achieve the same repletion rate of glycogen. So instead of having 1.2 grams per kilo of carbs, you can have 0.8, and on the top of that you can add protein, and then you get protein and carbs and the same rates of glycogen resynthesis, and even more protein synthesis, and basically for the same amount of calories you get more out of it.
And I guess even just going back to the carbohydrate intake, how I guess putting your applied hat on, if you have a runner that's saying, I double 3, 4, 5 times a week, would you almost be saying to them actually just have something? I believe you're a fan of Haribo, right? So you'd have some Haribo sort of available, as soon as you finish the run, and just have that, and then it sort of partly ticks the box at least. Would that be sort of what you'd be suggesting?
Yeah, when I work with athletes, one of the things I usually ask them is okay, so when you finish with the exercise, what happens? And if they say then I have a shower and then I prepare my meal, okay, that's a red flag for me, because you probably lose half an hour. So let's try to get something really quick, a glass of juice, Haribo, just something, and then you have time to shower, and then you can basically prepare your meal with protein and everything else. Food quality is still a priority. You don't want to eat just Haribo, even though I'm a big fan of them. But, equally, if you come home and you have someone that prepares the meal and you go straight to eat pasta or whatever it is you have on the day, that's perfectly fine. You don't need to eat sugars. But ideally, you would have something straight when you finish.
I guess on that, the timing of the carbohydrate after training, that becomes exponentially more important the more training you're doing, I guess, and the frequency especially. If you're only training 3 or 4 times a week, it's probably not something you need to worry about too much. If it's one of the athletes that you're supporting in one of the tour teams, then it becomes much more crucial, I guess, in that they are doing goodness knows how many hours of training, 30 plus hours of training a week. And with the example of runners who are doubling, I guess the energy expenditure of a runner versus a cyclist is going to be lower because they can't do as many training hours, but the frequency is probably higher. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, it would be similar probably with triathletes as well. With a lot of training sessions, and sometimes some are shorter. So one of the things I really like to do in this case, for instance, you basically can do two things at the same time, which is like you have a running training session. Okay, you want this person to train the gut, so you give this person a lot of carbohydrates during the session. You know that this person will never oxidize all of the carbohydrates during the session, but it will be a really good practice for training the gut, and the carbohydrates will be available straight after the session. So okay, it's fine, you can basically get the next meal in like half an hour or so. And that's like a really good strategy how to like use the carbohydrates effectively, not overblow the budget.
Yeah. I guess just thinking out loud here, like one of the big crazes in athletics and running at the minute is double threshold training, where you're obviously doing two like heavy and domain sessions a day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and obviously the higher intensity, the more carbohydrate you're burning. I'm guessing in that situation, you would be suggesting fuel during that morning session and probably the evening one too, but especially the morning so that you're not too depleted going into the evening.
Yeah, so when we talk about like high intensity exercise, the problem is that we are not really absorbing a lot of carbohydrates at high intensities. So as soon as you go above the first lactate threshold, I have a feeling that absorption rates would go down, because what happens is the blood will move away from the intestines towards the skin and towards the muscle, just normal, simple physiology. And as a result of that, the absorption should go down. It's really difficult to test that because just the methodology. But there is one nice study from like 20 or 30 years ago that actually demonstrated that. That the absorption rates actually go down during high intensity exercise. So in other words, you can't rely on ingesting carbohydrates during the second session if you have low glycogen stores. So you first and foremost need to replete glycogen stores. How to do that? With carbohydrates. But then when running, you have a problem of really having a limited budget, because the energy expenditure in a day is not, you're not doing like crazy volume. So you really probably need to prioritize carbohydrates and minimize fats, at least on that day, to be able to be still in energy budget, but have enough glycogen for the next session. And this is when like becomes a bit tricky sometimes to do it right and not overblow the budget.
I guess the one other area of the, like, going back to the review paper that sort of stood out to me was and it's something I've especially seen this year at the Tour de France was cherry juice. I really like EF and their daily videos. I noticed every single day, like, all of the riders are having a cherry juice drink immediately after the stage. And I just wondered that there was some benefit to cherry juice, but I wondered if you could just talk through, I guess, the theory of it, and then why you're seeing those riders doing that afterwards, and whether people should do that themselves as well.
So the cherry juice is like one of those wonder supplements that everyone thinks that it works, and it's really popular over the last few years. It's been really popular. What it's supposed to do is what it does, it's not 100% clear on how it does it, because some claim it's basically the antioxidant, and we know antioxidants help with the preventing the muscle damage during exercise. But then we also know that antioxidants have a negative effect on training adaptations, whereas cherry juice should basically have this positive effect without hampering the training adaptations, but nobody has tested this. But there is quite a lot of evidence to suggest that cherry juice can help with the recovery. But interesting thing is that if you look at the studies, they never take cherry juice just after exercise. They always take cherry juice start like 1 week before the actual training session, and they usually take it in the morning and in the evening, not immediately after exercise. But I guess some brands need to sell the product, so they position it
exactly what I was just about to say there. Yeah, maybe more of a financial arrangement than actually evidence-based performance enhancement.
But yeah, there is evidence that it does work. So when you basically have everything sorted out, I think like in professional cycling, when you basically know exactly how many carbohydrates they're having and you have them everything weighted out, then perhaps this can help that 0.1% in the end of the Grand Tour.
For now, are we putting this in the same category as like ketones, where we're not really sure how it works, not sure if it's a benefit, costs quite a lot to buy. Maybe maybe focus on other things, especially for like an
Yeah,
amateur athlete.
yeah, definitely. This is like not going to change anything if you don't have the basics sorted out. It's like buying in cycling like ultralight bike without trying to lose weight, which is like 20 kilos too high, and probably like buying super expensive shoes without doing the training. Like it's a bit pointless. So yeah, you first need to sort out the basics, and this is like the message I keep trying to tell to the riders, and when they're at home, because basics are most hard to achieve, because taking a cherry juice is really easy, but then thinking about the food and what to prepare and what to eat when, that requires more thought, and that's more difficult for people. And if you basically distract them with cherry juice and ketones and those kind of stuff, you very often like then forget about the basics, and you just don't benefit from anything then.
They always say that about taking a multivitamin, don't they? But people take that and then go, well, I don't need to worry about my fruit and veg and all of that. Or there's just a subconscious bias to not be as concerned about eating that extra piece of fruit if I've taken my multivitamin. One thing I wanted to ask about from that same paper is you've got a really nice graph in there saying, like, looking at the effective glycemic index on 24-hour muscle glycogen resynthesis, and there was a higher rate of resynthesis with high glycemic foods. So I guess that's another factor, is it, to consider with when you're choosing what you're going to consume post training?
Yeah, I mean, this glycemic index is like a very debatable topic, to be honest, like, because when it comes to like fructose, it's not a high glycemic index type of carbohydrate. It's actually a low glycemic index, but we know that fructose is really effective for replenishing glycogen stores. So sometimes I would prefer to classify them as simple carbohydrates rather than complex. But yeah, like in all studies, when you pull the literature together, you basically like classify them as like low or high glycemic index. But in athletes, it's very often elite athletes that they really struggle to eat, from a practical perspective, complex foods after strenuous exercise. So giving them simple carbohydrates makes a lot more sense. You speed up the absorption, and they are also more effective. So having simple carbohydrates straight after the finish line makes more sense than having whole grain pasta or whole grain rice on the finish line.
Would you look to periodize that, though, with having more simple carbohydrates immediately afterwards and then more complex as like the next follow-up meal? Or do you think it doesn't really matter too much?
Yeah, this, like in professional cycling, what we do is like rider comes to the finish line, gets simple carbs. So usually they have like a juice or like, I don't know, cherry juice, or sometimes they have a Fanta or something really simple carbohydrates, handful of Haribos, or dates sometimes, like also like really simple carbs. They get to the bus, they get a shake with, again, some more simple carbohydrates and some protein. And then you start thinking about, okay, now some more normal food. So you give them rice and pasta. And then the evening would be then tailored to the next day's performance. So basically really go like from simple to more complex, or depending on what the goals are.
I guess if it's all right to ask you to maybe like put your applied hat on a bit more. Now just going back over some of the papers and some of the things you mentioned, I was just interested to get your thoughts on you mentioned about sort of I guess having like an intake, I guess, gradient in terms of carbohydrate or grams per hour during exercise, like with some of the cyclists you've worked with. Do you reckon that would do you reckon that would work like with a marathon, if assuming you run a fairly evenly split marathon? And like if we use Dan as an example, so like, you know, he's running a 2 hours 12 marathon, like would you say actually like start off a bit lower and then increase, or would you just say, or would you even flip it the other way?
Yeah, I would basically probably have a gradual intake. So we did a study a few years ago. I was super slow in getting it written up. It's under a review now. We look at cycling. It was 3 hours simulated race and a time trial in the end, and we look at different patterns. So even increasing or decreasing pattern, and we basically saw no performance benefits of any of the pattern. The only difference was like some marginal differences in gastrointestinal comfort, but I think that was very individual. So in marathon running, it's like 2 hours, just over 2 hours for him. I don't think that would make any difference to like just have a even dose, especially because there would still be probably some unabsorbed carbohydrates from breakfast. So you would just continue supplying carbohydrates into the bloodstream. Whereas like slower runners or ultra marathon runners, that's a different story perhaps. And then you might like start a bit 40 grams in the first hour and then ramp it up. But again, that would make more sense from the energy balance perspective, not so much on the day of when it's what matters is actually just performance.
I guess one of the big differences between cycling and what, you know, a Tour de France stage and a marathon is like the continuous intensity. It's just continuously high the whole time, whereas it's so much more stochastic in cycling and potentially in the ultra scene as well. When you're talking about mountain races, and you've got periods where the intensity actually probably isn't that high, and then you come to a climb and it ramps up. So I guess in that instance, it might be a bit more. It might be more beneficial to stagger it over the course of a stage, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, for 2 hours, you just like need to be consistent and just keep taking it. Like, and in a cycling race, like you have so many things going on, and sometimes like the finale is super hectic, and you want them to have more carbohydrates in the middle of the race, just because you know that in the finale there is no chance they will have the gels. Or it's a sprinter stage and you really don't want them to overdo the budget, and you just start really low and then progress higher. But it's really individual and really like stage by stage.
It's you mentioned sort of designing and starting to sort of use this protocol to measure like personalized carbohydrate intake. But is there any sort of, I want to say like field test, but there might not even be like a testing element of it. Is there any sort of methods you use to determine like, is this for you, like, is this rider someone that can intake a lot of carbohydrate per hour, or they're, you know, a lot less? Or is it really just trial and error and sort of go by like gastrointestinal comfort?
I mean, you can do the lab test. I think some people are trying to measure the same thing in the field, but there are so many methodological issues, then you might be overestimating the values and so on and so forth. Because one of the things is like you basically give a tracer, so a carbohydrate tracer. So the carbon is tagged, has a special tag on it, and then basically you track this carbon to see if it comes out of breath or not, and at what amount it comes out of breath. So you want the exercise intensity to be steady, because and not too hard, because then at too hard intensity you might have a problem with lactate, because the lactate will be accumulating, and some of this carbon that might actually be absorbed and used in glycolysis might be just stuck in the lactate pool and not come out later. So you would not actually see what the absorption is. Equally, if the intensity is too low, you're going down the hill in cycling, you actually might store some glycogen in the muscle, and this tag will suddenly become part of the glycogen. So in the next 5 minutes or 10 minutes, glycogen, at the breath, you will be getting the tag from the glycogen that ended up there and the tag coming from the drink. So the values would be highly inflated. And these are just the methodological issues that you just kind of can't really overcome. So that's why the test is really boring. 2 hours and a half, constant intensity, no stopping, and then you have the number. And you need 2 hours and a half because we've seen that until 2 hours and a half, the values are still going up.
I guess that's probably not practical for many runners, is it? Yeah, can't imagine recruiting.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't do. I think I only did one study with runners, but I think a couple of weeks ago, my colleague in Birmingham, so Gareth Wallace, personalized the intake of a few runners on trail runners, and it was just fine. And it was interesting to see like the numbers, and they were like, similar to what you would expect, but at the same time, like it reassures the practice and like, okay, this rider uptakes this much, you don't need to force feed 150 because 90 grams or 120 or whatever the number is makes most sense.
I guess another sort of thought I had just reading these papers and then just with some anecdotal experience. Would you even go as far to say like 90 grams an hour is maybe too much if you're on the marathon start line and you've got your carb load right, and you've had a little bit of carbohydrate in the morning, like we always mention, like having some orange juice or something just in the morning just to sort of top up your liver glycogen stores. But if you've got your carb load right, do you think actually 90 grams for a marathon especially might actually be too much? Like, so 90 grams an hour might be sort of too much. And actually, because I know just anecdotally, again, I've had, I think Andy Buchanan, who's got like the Australian marathon record, I think he was only on like 40 grams an hour last year at Valencia, but it sounded like he just got his carb load sort of bang on and actually didn't really feel like he could or needed much more than that.
Well, just like thinking what you would be using in terms of carbohydrates, like I feel like glycogen loading is the key, and like getting carbohydrates exogenously is mainly for like mouth rinsing purposes, and perhaps like really towards the end, like supplying some extra carbohydrates. There might be a benefit of suppressing fat oxidation rates, as we discussed earlier, and that giving a small fraction of the performance benefit. But at the same time, you might be risking GI issues. And we also know from some of the papers that perhaps if you go too high with carbohydrates, you increase the glycogen use, which you don't probably want to do. So my gut feeling is that it's probably, up to 90 for a marathon running would make sense. But I know that people don't agree with me sometimes, and that there is research happening as we speak that is going to test this hypothesis. So wait and see.
So if you think the glycogen loading is probably more important, what would your protocol for that look like, assuming it was just like a 1 day race?
Yeah, I mean, when I do it with cyclists or runners or triathletes, we just do like 1 day glycogen loading protocol. Long gone are days when people were loading for 3 days. So I like to recommend the athletes to go the day before, really early, do the activation session, like a few efforts, which I guess runners also do in the morning. The earlier the better, because this gives you more time then to carbohydrate load. I sometimes, when I do it myself for cycling, I do it fasted, so they have more energy budget for the rest of the day, and I'm more hungry as well. And then it's for the rest of the day, it's just carbohydrates, like simple carbohydrates, 10 to 12 grams per kilo. I like to have like 3 main normal meals, so you still get the protein, and then the rest is basically like really simple sugar-based carbohydrates, because you don't want a lot of fiber in the diet or protein, because as soon as you start eating even pasta, if you look how much protein it has, when you want to eat a lot, it's a lot. And every gram counts, especially if you're racing often and you want to like not gain too much weight. With cyclists, we sometimes see that some riders are also sensitive to gluten. So sometimes I try to avoid doing glycogen loading with gluten gluten pasta. So if you decide for pasta, gluten-free pasta is better option. Again, this is not science-backed, more like applied experience. But yeah, this is what kind of we do, and so far, yeah, it worked pretty well.
Yeah,
Then a
like
meal on the morning as well, I'm guessing. Yeah.
Yeah, the morning meal is like an interesting one again. Like if you look at the professional cyclists and you see them eating porridge, yes, they're eating porridge because they're also their start is like at 1 o'clock. I don't know when the marathon
Yeah, much
marathon
earlier.
start.
Normally like 9 or 10 at the
Yeah,
latest. Maybe. Yeah.
and then you have triathlons that start like at 6 in the morning. So you need to completely change what you have for breakfast and have it really simple. So I don't know, like rice with some like lactose-free milk, like a pudding rice with some carbs, and like not overdo it because you've done your homework, which was to glycogen load the day before. You just need to top up the liver glycogen, and you don't need like massive amounts for that. You need to take something that will not cause GI issues during the run, and I think that's the most important thing. So yeah, really again, simple carbs, some fructose sources, and that's it.
Yeah, I definitely think that's something that I don't know about you, Owain, but I see people getting wrong is go, right, marathon breakfast, need loads of carbs. You should have done that the day before. And then they're the ones that are having the GI distress on race day when they've had, yeah, a massive bowl of porridge or whatever. I mean, I've normally just, depending on, yeah, where I am in the world, I just like white bread and jam, or yeah, I've done the rice pudding. I've done that before. I've done uh, Rice Krispies, anything like that. Uh, but you
I
don't need
mean,
that much, do you, to replenish your
I mean,
liver glycogen?
yeah, I mean the recommendations when you look at them are like 1 to 4 grams per kilo, and you're like 1 to 4. That's like a really broad range. And then a really simple recommendation is like 1 gram per kilo for every hour you have. So if you're having breakfast 2 hours before, you go with 2 grams per kilo. 1 hour, 1 gram per kilo, and then simplify things a lot.
I think yeah, like just I think we've mentioned it before. Like it's just people um just don't even carb load really at all. And I mean I guess like we read this stuff, but the carb load stuff's been out quite a long time, hasn't it? Like Louise Burke's papers have been around a long time, and like if we're saying that maybe even like 90 grams an hour might be you know at the upper end if you're getting your carb load right, you're spending more on like your gels for the race, but you actually might not need them if you just get the carb load right. And we've talked as well about how yeah you can fill yourself up on pasta and it feels so filling, or you can just have like a pack of sweets, like yeah a pack of Haribo or whatever. Like it's so much more dense and like just easy to tolerate. And yeah, it feels horrible like eating a few packs of Haribo in a day, but it's way easier than trying to fill yourself with like rice or like porridge or whatever. Like yeah, it's not actually too hard or too expensive to do right compared to a lot of other like things in running, like gels and like you said earlier, Tim, like super shoes. Like yeah,
Yeah, this is like such a simple thing like performance booster. I think like it's definitely working, especially for longer events. We know that like I don't know, half marathon might not require like proper glycogen loading, but marathon definitely does. And like yeah, especially for slower runners that like would be running for a longer period of time, and it just definitely works. Like I did a stupid mistake this past weekend. I was supposed to do 6 hours indoors on the bike, doing a race simulation. And the day before, I was like, well, I don't need glycogen loading. I'm just like trying to lose weight. I'm not going to load myself. I will just have a bit more than usual, but not that much. I will be eating 90 grams per hour on the bike. Yeah, and after 4 hours and a half, I basically stepped off the bike because I was just dead. Um, and I'm still recovering, and it's Monday, so it didn't work well.
So on that, Tim, I know you're obviously a really keen cyclist. Enjoying being down in Dartmoor and having access to that now. You're in Exeter.
Yeah, I mean it's way better than up there in Birmingham, but I still miss the climbs in the Alps. So
Yeah. But I was gonna say you're also like experimenting on yourself. What have you currently testing out as a case study? Because I see you hooked up to a metabolic cart quite frequently on your Instagram. What are you doing there? What are you trialing, and what's yeah, what's going on?
at the moment, like I'm really, to be honest, avoiding metabolic card because I have this feeling that whenever I see the numbers, I influence the numbers. So like when I'm doing a VO2 max test, I can't do a VO2 max test anymore because if I don't see what I want to see, then the motivation goes down. I can't even finish it. Um, and yeah, I think just can't do any performance test on myself anymore. But at the moment, what I'm working on is just like try to personalize the fructose intake and see how much variation we are seeing in people because it's always like the intake during exercise is glucose and fructose, and I think the variation between how effective either of them is pretty big.
That sounds really cool. I mean, also I'm the same. Like I used to get Dan to turn the screen away because I didn't want to see the numbers, which is really stupid because like if you're doing a VO2 max test, like it doesn't you're just going to max, right? So,
You've got
but
no
I find the
influence
same.
over the numbers, have you? You've just got to
Yeah.
keep working. But yeah, there's definitely some psychology there, though.
I mean, if you see the number and like it's not going up because it's just not going up for that moment, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, perhaps I see a plateau. Let's just stop. And then when you stop and actually look at if there was a plateau and then you don't see it, and you're like, shit, like I should have gone for longer. I just stopped because I thought I saw something that didn't exist. Happened a few times now, so.
Are you do you participate yourself in some of your studies as well?
Yeah, all of them. So I
Yeah.
have 18 holes, biopsy holes on my leg. So yeah.
I do. I've heard you say this before, so I did want to ask. I do think it's really important, though, isn't it? Like, I know I found like recruiting people for my study, like it's so much easier to say to them, "This is what's involved." I know because I'm participant one. Yeah, like I do think it lends a lot of weight, doesn't it? When you're, especially if you're asking a biopsy, if you can say, "Yeah, I've had it
Yeah,
done myself." Like, yeah,
yeah. It's always funny, like when I see colleagues, and then when I was PhD student and later on a postdoc, when people that were never had a biopsy were explaining how a biopsy looks like and how it feels like, and I'm like, well, it doesn't really work that way because yeah, you've never had one, so you don't know. So how can you say it? And I like to experiment on myself because I want to feel how their athletes are feeling. I feel like without that, it's really difficult to be like smart and like, yeah, you can read the textbook, but that's not all of it. You don't need to be world class, but just have some sort of experience. I think that really helps.
yeah. There's definitely like an innate feeling, isn't there? Or like just your sort of intuition that you get. Yeah, if you're on the bike for 6 hours, yeah, doing something like that, like you pick up something, don't you, that you can't convey if you haven't done it. Which, yeah, I think is pretty important. Um, Normally, it's good fun to be part of studies. Some of them are maybe not, but
Psychology ones, right?
I did a horrible facial cooling one a few months ago that like someone told me before it started like, oh, it does feel like you're dying, and I was like, oh, you're. But they were actually telling the truth. It was, yeah, a bit of a panic attack, sort of, yeah, not being able to see or hear anything and my face just freezing cold. But no, it's good fun.
So yeah, people should take part in research because this is the only way we can advance the science. Without that, like they can't expect us to know the answers to the questions because we can't do research without people. So that's really much appreciated. And yeah, people should volunteer for research.
I guess maybe if we leave it there, but is there any way if people are interested they can take part in any of your studies? Is there anywhere to find out about them?
Um, I don't know. I haven't posted anywhere yet. I just yeah. But pretty active on Instagram, I guess. So
Yeah.
that's where people can find me.
Yeah, we'll post your Instagram in the Spotify description, and I guess just University of Exeter as well. Check out the exercise labs because I'm sure not you're not the only one recruiting for participants. Um, but yeah, I
No.
guess there was no more questions for me. Do you have any more, Dan?
Just what direction do you think sports nutrition is going in? We've gone. At the minute, the trend seems to be more and more carbs. Do you think we're going to get a blowback on that? Is it just going to be cyclical, and we're going to be going keto and low carb in 10 years' time, and just keep repeating that cycle to eternity? What do you think the future looks like?
I think it's gonna become a bit more balanced and like more personalized, and we've seen that before, like super high carbohydrate diet, and then it was low carbohydrate, but then people started thinking about fueling for the work required, and then that a bit died off at the moment. It's all about high carbs again, and I feel like something similar will happen with personalization now that we have like method to actually measure and assess things, and I hope these things we can improve and like really prescribe the nutrition individualized.
Yeah,
Sounds good.
no, I hope so. I hope that's the way we go. But someone's always trying to sell something, aren't they? So my we'll see, yeah, we'll see what happens. But no, thanks for joining us, Tim. I really enjoyed our chat, and it was I'm sure the listeners will take a lot away from that.
Yeah. Thanks for your time, Tim.
Thanks for having me.